I'm thinking about my story from last month about Shlomo Mansour, who was the oldest hostage currently being held in Gaza. As a young child, survived the bloody Iraqi Farhud. He went on to live another 70 years in the kibbutz. Then at age 85, was grabbed in his pajamas and violently shoved to his car and driven into Gaza on October 7th. I get emotional when I think about this guy. I'm sorry. It's like, it really affected me. Like talking to his daughter and his grandson. Like this buff kid who's like a personal trainer now, talking about how his Saba, his fondest memory is building a SpongeBob SquarePants doll out of wood with him in the workshop. It was just, it got you, you know? My name is Joel Chaushu, and I'm the Quebec correspondent for the Canadian Jewish News. I think these stories are worth telling. We can do that with your help. Visit the cjn.ca/donate to support our work. You'll get a quarterly magazine and a tax receipt to boot. What's not to love?
The War Measures Act exists. It's now called the Emergencies Act. If the federal government felt so strongly, there is the possibility of using that legislation. It is extreme, but it does exist. And the third question...
That's some of what it sounded like Monday night in a conference room inside Montreal's Jewish Federation building, an event billed as a community town hall with the Trudeau government's two top anti-Semitism advocates, Ambassador Deborah Lyons, Canada's Special Envoy on Preserving Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Anti-Semitism, and Montreal Liberal MP Anthony Housefather, the Special Advisor to the Prime Minister on Canada's Jewish community and anti-Semitism. Plus the moderator was Richard Marceau, a Vice President of CIJA, the Centre for Israel and Jewish Affairs. Although the turnout was low, only about 30 people braved a Montreal snowstorm, many of those who came expressed their frustrations at the mic, showing they believe the federal government has abandoned Canada's Jewish community since October 7th. It's not hard to see why the people were on edge. This town hall happened just 2 weeks after Montrealers saw protesters opposed to a NATO conference cause a riot in the streets, smash windows, burn cars, and others who were anti-Israel protesters swarm campuses, give Nazi salutes, and call for the return of the Holocaust for Jews, and burn an effigy of Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The city police arrested a total of 3 people and pledged to arrest more, but many Jewish folks have had it. Even Côte St. Luc's mayor, Mitchell Brownstein, accused the mayor of Montreal of allowing city police to normalize violent anti-Semitism, protect the protesters, but allow intimidation of Jews and not enforce existing anti-protest injunctions around places of worship. Quebec's premiers weighed in too. He's criticized Montreal's mayor for doing nothing to protect the city's Jews, and he went so far as to call for Muslims to be banned from praying on the streets and blocking Quebec roads, and he vowed to use the notwithstanding clause in the Constitution to make that stick. With all this as a backdrop, Jewish leaders are now busy working behind the scenes to push Ottawa to convene an urgent national anti-Semitism summit, but one that will be tightly focused on law enforcement, hate crimes, enforcing Canada's existing laws, and tweaking the criminal code to add intimidation, bubble legislation, and more.
It is a systemic failure across the country that more arrests have not been made, more charges have not been pressed, more prosecutions have not happened.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Thursday, December the 12th, 2024. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky Gluskin Charitable Foundation.
I don't live in a very, very Jewish world. What I see as my role at the CJN, in part, is having this bigger picture of how society at large sees Jews and being kind of prepared to understand it. So on October 16th, 2023, I wrote a column really just asking, where would a Jew not be considered a settler? This was at a moment where Jews were being accused not only of being settlers anywhere in Israel, not specifically in the West Bank, and also anywhere in North America, and basically just looking at this question of where on earth is there a consensus that Jews can live and that that's fine. Sometimes the answer isn't a place, but it is rather that there are people who think Jews should not live. My name is Phoebe Maltz-Bovey, and I'm the opinion editor at the Canadian Jewish News. To support this kind of work, make a tax-deductible donation at thecjn.ca/donate.
Over 3 years ago, in July of 2021, the federal government convened its first ever emergency anti-Semitism summit under the stewardship of cabinet ministers and the guidance of Irwin Cotler, the country's first special envoy on anti-Semitism. It was held shortly after the last Israel-Hamas war in Gaza, which saw spikes of anti-Semitic attacks on Jews in our country, including online and on the streets, but these all died down somewhat afterwards until October 7th, which now has seen a tsunami of anti-Semitism exploding, with 900 hate crimes reported to Canadian police against Jews last year alone. For months, Montreal human rights advocate Marvin Rotrand has been pushing for this second summit, but the new special envoy, Deborah Lyons, wasn't initially keen on the idea and thought there were better ways to fight anti-Semitism than a gabfest. But in recent days, the summit's idea has been gaining momentum. The Senate passed a motion to push for one, Canadian Women Against Anti-Semitism sent a petition to Parliament, and now Ambassador Lyons herself is on board, as she told the town hall in Montreal it can't happen soon enough.
But let me say this, because I am not letting municipal, provincial, and federal governments, politicians off the hook on this one. There's absolutely no reason why, since October 7th, they have not been able to come together and say, what is it we need to be doing? Either to support our university administrators, either to work on law enforcement, to work on social media, whatever it is. This is a crisis in Canada, and we expect more from the three levels of government to come together and do the coordination that needs to be done. This suggestion by CJA to have this forum, and Anthony, I think you've been pushing this for like 6 months. It has to happen. It has to happen. I actually felt like I should announce it tonight, but there's no cameras here. Yes, Ellen, I can see Ellen from Jewish News. Don't go with that, Ellen, because it hasn't been announced yet, but it has to happen. The three levels of government have got to come together.
CJA, the Centre for Israel and Jewish Affairs, which says it represents about 150,000 Canadian Jews and Jewish federations, kicked off a renewed public campaign for this new summit on November 25th. CJA's Vice President, Richard Marceau, held a media conference on Parliament Hill and sounded the alarm about unchecked enforcement of Canadian laws threatening everyone, not just Jews. CJA wants this summit to be one of a handful of measures that the government takes. Aside from coordinating law enforcement across provinces and cities, more training for prosecutors about anti-Semitism, they want Ottawa to ban symbols of terror like the swastika, which CJA feels embolden extremists and undermine Canadian security. In an interview after he moderated Monday's town hall, Marceau outlined what his anti-Semitism summit agenda might look like.
So what we want is not a summit where people talk and emote and it's a talk shop. What we've asked about a week or so ago, it's a forum that is focused on law enforcement, where the gaps are, what can be done and has not been done, what's in the toolbox that have not been used, identify the gaps in legislation and then fill them. So it's very, very focused on tachlis, on action, on law enforcement.
Last week I did a story where the City of Montreal sent us the numbers of how many charges they've laid against people since October 7th, and that they sent to the procurateur of the prosecutor. 42 in Montreal, whereas Toronto has sent 160 people charged with 403 charges. What could a summit do, or a forum do, with those small numbers in Montreal and big in Toronto?
It's police, it's Crown, it's the bench, it's the political sector, it is law enforcement. It's a system-wide failure, and that is why we need that forum. Not to talk, but to say enough with the buck passing. there are issues. It's not normal with all the balagan, all the demonstrations, all the regulations, bylaws, laws that have been broken, that only 42 charges have been laid in Montreal. It is unacceptable. And I know law enforcement and politicians will say, well, we're trying to de-escalate. It has done exactly the opposite by allowing people to cross red lines, to break the law. We've made things worse for Jews and for all Canadians.
So where is this at? When are we going to have an announcement? What needs to happen and who's coming?
We are hoping that it's going to be soon. It should be federal government, municipal governments, provincial governments, law enforcement, Crown services, everybody at the table, because we don't want to be sent from one place to another, one room to another, and say, well, it's this guy's fault or it should be led by this person. No, enough with this.
Is there anybody that's not on board so far? Is it going to be an all-partisan, all-party thing?
It should be everybody. This is a national crisis. There's a national crisis of anti-Semitism in Canada. It is up to the federal government to lead and to bring everybody at the same table, because only the federal government can do that.
For his part, Anthony Housefather told the crowd he personally met with the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, last week. The summit was one of Housefather's 3 asks. He told the audience, quote, "We've got very good chances of announcing the summit very shortly." Now, he said the summit was one of Housefather's key asks of the Prime Minister. Ask number 2 was to support a new proposal already before Parliament that would change the criminal code and remove a loophole in the hate speech section. Right now, it protects people who utter hate speech or glorify terrorism from prosecution if they say it as part of a prayer or as part of their religious beliefs. The Bloc Québécois introduced this amendment months ago, but it hasn't moved forward. And the third ask, Housefather says he asked the Prime Minister to give a rousing speech to the country about anti-Semitism, even though Trudeau has repeatedly stated at various smaller events after October 7th that he stands with Jews and with Israel and with Zionists. As for the audience member's suggestion that it's time to invoke the Emergencies Act to solve the anti-Semitism problem right now in Canada, Housefather said that was a hard no on the proposal. And here's some more of what the town hall sounded like.
And Anthony, before I go to you, and I'll just add a level of complexity, but there's also the Crown. And just was it yesterday, was announced that the charges that were laid for people who disturbed the Giller Prize Awards were actually dropped. And so that also brings a level of complexity. So how do you deal with that? What do you suggest be done? And are you satisfied with what's being done so far?
Well, as I said, I obviously am not. I think that, again, there's been a level of failure everywhere. And I fully understand what you said, Richard. As I've said from the beginning, I understand the average person in the street. They just want something to be done. They don't care who does it. They want words to be translated into actions, and comforting words are not enough in a situation like this. But it is important that people understand who is ultimately responsible for making that action happen. They can't have the illusion that the Prime Minister can change the policing of the Montreal police. That the police are hired and fired by the municipality. And the direction is set by the Public Security Commission of the Agglomeration. Over the last few weeks, I have been much more persistent. We had a meeting with Mayor Plante. Deborah's office was there. Deborah was somewhere else at that moment. And we followed up with a meeting with the police directly a little bit ago. I went with Mayor Brownstein and Mayor Smith and Rabbi Shire and Rabbi Puko and Masija to that meeting. And we talked about a number of incidents that happened in Montreal that scared our community and where we did not see the police exercise the powers that they could under the criminal code and under municipal bylaws. It is not okay to have constant demonstrations that one would in Westmount Square. At night, after the Westmount municipal bylaws say you cannot make noise there. It is not okay to have all kinds of criminal code provisions on intimidation not used. So this week we'll be following up that meeting, the people that were at it, with the letter to Mayor Plante with suggestions as to what should be done exactly for police to apply the law, and how the Public Security Commission of the Agglomeration should be creating a policy that the police are bound to follow. So you're not directing police in a unique case, but you're creating a policy like other cities have that tell you how to police, so that the police can't say that they have no direction anymore. And we need to do that across the country. We are working, Deborah's idea was to work directly with big city mayors. There's an association of big city mayors. We're approaching them. I had a chance to meet with Mayor Howarth in Hamilton. We're trying, Deborah met with the Mayor of Winnipeg. We are trying our best, but we have to understand that, like you said, on there are certain areas, I think on the municipalities we can push and we can make a meaningful difference. On prosecutors who are independent, I don't know that any politician can make them do or not do something. And if they don't feel that there's enough tools in the toolbox, they should be telling us to change the criminal law to create more tools. For example, what Richard and I have been working on for a very long time, and that I know Deborah supports, is an intimidation offense at the federal level called bubble legislation that would say there's a specific criminal infraction stopping you from blocking access to or leaving a school, a place of worship, or a community center. Even though provinces and municipalities could do it better because they could pass zoning bylaws creating a set distance between the buildings, but they're not doing it as of yet. We need to do that because you can't take away someone else's freedom of speech by using your freedom of speech. And that is exactly what's happening.
The agenda for such a second forum might also include some of the 19 recommendations made this week in a report from the House of Commons Standing Committee on Justice about anti-Semitism. Some key findings, which the Justice Minister says his department is now studying, include the provinces appointing special prosecutors to tackle only hate crimes, helping police across the country deal with street demonstrations where the line is crossed into criminal behavior, and drop some sort of national blueprints which police everywhere would agree to follow. And the same goes with helping police forces develop a standard definition of what a hate crime looks like and what a hate incident looks like. And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, made possible in part by the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Australia has just created a task force to counter anti-Semitism after last week's arson led to the firebombing of a Melbourne synagogue. The Australian federal and state police have vowed to work with local law enforcement units and tackle issues like calls to violence and advocating terrorism or genocide. The Daily is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. The executive producer is Michael Freeman, and our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening.
I'm Michael Weisdorf, Chief Executive Officer with the Canadian Jewish News. We've put a lot of effort into trying to engage with the younger audience and the younger demographic, those who haven't really engaged with the CJN recently. They don't realize we're back. They say, I absolutely remember reading this on my Booby and Zadie's dining room table or my parents' den. We're trying to bring the Canadian Jewish News into the 21st century. The Canadian Jewish News is a not-for-profit organization, and we're also a registered journalism organization with the CRA. So we can provide tax receipts for donations at any level. To help support the Canadian Jewish News and help us continue providing free, high-quality journalism for the Jewish community, you can support us at thecjn.ca/donate. Thank you for your support and for being a part of our journey.